people get started with real estate investing for various reasons. Perhaps you want to supplement your income so you can take your family on a dream vacation, or maybe you want to leave your job and do something more fulfilling. Frank Patalano was a middle school history teacher for 17 years, and he always had an interest in finance and real estate investing. In 2005, he decided to get started and made his first acquisition. Unfortunately, the property he purchased did not turn out like he had planned, but that did not stop him. Shortly after, he made his first multifamily acquisition, and the rest is history. There are different segments within the multifamily real estate space that you can choose to participate in. For example, duplexes, triplexes, and quads are considered multifamily residential. This market is highly competitive due to the number of buyers seeking deals. You also have middle market, multifamily commercial, which could be considered around 50 units. Last, we have large multifamily commercial properties, which are greater than 100 units, but is also highly competitive. Frank found his niche with middle market multifamily properties as he found them to be just right. In this episode, Frank discusses some of the earlier challenges he faced, as well as some challenges he is currently facing while managing at a distance. Well, happy to have Frank Patalano on our show today. Frank, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you got started in real estate investing?
Sure. So I was a full-time school teacher. I started around 2001 working and doing middle school, teaching history. And my parents and grandparents owned a little bit of real estate, but not much. And just like a couple of rentals. And they weren't necessarily positive real estate, but I loved money, finance. I like stocks. I liked real estate. And, I just started reading a few books and said, wow, I should probably try this. And this is not like the current run up. This was, just before the last crash. And so I studied a lot and gradually got to the point where I had saved enough money that I decided to dive in and buy a property.
And so your first acquisition, that was single family or?
So my first attempt at making money was I bought some land probably about 2.5 hours away from where I lived through an auction in New York City. And one of the things I learned at there was you can never have enough knowledge. So I actually lost money on that deal because that was not a buildable lot. And good thing I didn't spend a lot of money. I got a good deal on it. But that was my first investment. And then some people will go for, the $20,000 course through somebody. And I guess I lost the money instead by doing it directly and jumping in. But besides that, my first one after that is I bought a triplex as the market was coming down in Rhode Island. It was a nice 2-bedroom each unit, and I bought it for less than half the price of what it sold for 4 years before.
Wow. So you started with the triplex, and before we started recording here, you mentioned that now you've accumulated many units. So can you walk us through that process, how you went from, the triplex that you had to where you are right now?
Sure. So as you know, it's just about working every day at it, trying to fall forward or move forward every day. It's funny you say that because even though I paid half the price of what somebody lost it for in foreclosure 4 years before, I still didn't really make much money on that property. It took a good solid 5 years of, fixing mechanicals, gradually starting to slowly raise rents, etc., before you started to really make money. That first year you put on a new roof. The second year you might put in two new heating systems. Then you might deal with a bad vacancy, something like that. But what I did was, as I had that property, and even if I wasn't making much money on it, as I was continuing to work a regular full-time job, I gradually saved enough to, buy into another deal. And then, buy into, probably 1 or 2 every year. And it got to the point where banks started to give me a hard time for debt to income ratio. So I found a partner. and then we started to buy some things small, triplexes, six families, stuff like that.
So, and so you mentioned here just now, one point you brought up was the banks were giving you a little bit of trouble with the debt to income ratio on that. So, can you talk a little bit about a little touch on that subject? Because I think that for some people, in our minds we may have this sort of blockage, like thinking, okay, I have a few multifamilies, like triplexes and duplexes and things, and I want to go bigger, but like you said, having issues with kind of like this whole debt to income when you're trying to go out and get loans and things, and then you said you ended up taking a partner. So can you touch on that a little bit more?
Sure, absolutely. So banks obviously want to make money, and they want to make it in a safe way. And especially near the bottom of the market in the last cycle, there was a lot of fear from banks about releasing their purse strings, if you know what I mean. And what happened was is that you start to get to the point where you owe banks, 500, $600,000, $1 million, and they start to get a little worried that maybe this guy's getting too big. How are we going to collect? I mean, they don't understand that the things are going to be rented. I mean, even if you're in a not so good market, you're going to collect some kind of rent. But they don't always. The average bank doesn't always consider rent to be as solid as a W-2 income.
Mm.
So they did love my regular full-time job for the longest time. They just started to get worried that I was had so much debt that I owed and what the monthly payments would be, because when it got to the point that my monthly payments were just a little higher than what my total income was, they didn't want to figure in the rents. But eventually you find a bank that's willing to work with you.
Got it. So you just recently you found your partner, and you continue to scale, right? And you just recently closed on a 50 unit project in Idaho. You had mentioned. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So that's a little different. When we did a lot of the smaller properties, I mostly did some kind of a joint venture, or we set up a new LLC with one partner or a different partner, stuff like that. The Idaho deal was more of a real estate syndication in which we raised money from a few passive investors in order to get a deal done that was a little bigger than most of us could handle on our own, especially when we have other things going on. So yeah, so we bought the 50 unit in Pocatello. It needs some work. It's definitely a turnover property, but value add in some ways. But we bought it for 2.4 million. We're going to put just under $500,000 worth of work into it, and we're going to be able to raise rents, generate a nice cash flow. Our goal is to pay off some distributions to everybody that's a part owner, and then sell it in 6, 7, or 8 years.
Now, I've heard many different perspectives and things from many investors that I've spoken to in the past with regards to, you know, how easy it is to get financing for, let's say, smaller properties like duplexes and triplexes, etc., versus kind of like a 50 unit or 100 unit type deal. Can you share with us, in your experience, what have you found to be kind of like the easier one to get financing for?
Sure. So I am slightly more of a fan of the smaller deals, only, but not just for the financing. The major reason is because think of your competition. Think about who you're buying from. If you're buying a smaller building, you have a much better chance of being able to buy it just from a regular mom and pop that just wants to get out of it, move on, retire, something like that. But as you're buying bigger buildings, your competition, is usually professionals that are sometimes equal to you or smarter than you, and they know what they're doing as much as you do. You know, that's on the buy side. Now on the financing side, let's see. On the financing side, you can just go to a regular bank. You're going to put down 20 or 25%. It's going to be a commercial note on like a 12-unit complex, something like that. When you start to get into the bigger things, if you have the cash to put down the down payment, you have no problem. But if you're raising money from other people, it starts to become a little harder. So the problem that we had is because it was a 50 unit, it was just big enough to do syndications, but just small, but a little too small for many people that wanted to invest. They wanted like that 100 unit deal, etc. So it was right in that middle section where some people might JV it, other people would be willing to syndicate it. And we actually struggled a little bit with the raise. We had a few investors that basically said, you know what, I'm willing to JV it, but I don't want to be a passive investor on it. Or I had other people that just said, oh yeah, that's way too small for what I'm willing to invest in. So it's just kind of
Mhm.
weird. It was right on that
Yeah.
cusp.
Yeah. So it's interesting because to add to that, I spoke with a few investors over the past week, and we actually did talk about this similar topic being the how intense right now in the multifamily value add space competition is for like these larger deals, right? And in many cases, it's like a lot of the numbers, they're just not working out. I look at deals just like you do, they come across my desk and I run the numbers and it just doesn't, they don't make sense. For what the going cap rate is and the value add component. I mean, you're not really making much anything. There's really no room for error. However, the one thing I did find was with some of the smaller deals, like in the 50 unit, 60 unit range, or 40 units, like there's really seems to be a lot of opportunity out there. Is and
Yeah,
is that
this
is and is that something that you're finding, or what are you seeing?
I would agree. I would say there's definitely a slice of opportunity in that mid-level space, we'll call it. Not too
Mhm.
big, not too small, kind of like that Cinderella effect. The biggest problem that I see is a lot of wholesalers. I mean, I love wholesalers, but some of them, all they're doing is just throwing around other people's deals and daisy chaining, stuff like that, tacking on a few bucks to each deal. Um, the good and the bad about the deal that we did, we got lucky because it was off market. My partners had known the owners, and the owners were fighting over the deal. But the drawback was is they had just bought it a year ago. So I mean, they had well every year lately has meant more and more because the market keeps going up. They had put some money and work into it. They needed to break even in one way or another. So we had to be creative enough to allow them to break even and still allow us to make money.
Mhm. So throughout, this process and not just this specific deal, but all the deals that you've done so far, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges that you've encountered?
So on the smaller deals, I feel it's very hard to find a deal. On the bigger deals, I feel it's less hard to find the deal, but harder to find enough money in order to passively, uh, enough passive deposit and money from others in order to make the deal happen. Because I'm not going to sit around myself with three, four, $500,000 waiting for the next deal. You have to keep the money churning, the time velocity of money. So you got to keep doing small deals. I mean, we do some hard money lending here or there. I stay busy, but you got to keep that money moving because if not, it's just going to depreciate and
Mhm.
devalue itself.
So on the smaller deals in when you're saying that they're a lot more difficult to find, is it because of a lack of inventory that you're seeing, or the numbers aren't
Mostly,
working out?
well, it's mostly lack of inventory. I feel the numbers don't work out because of that lack of inventory.
Mm,
Because if you're doing smaller deals, there's a lot more competition
mm,
as well. So I mean, if you're looking at a triplex, you're not just competing with people who want to make money. You're competing with individual people that are house hacking or want to, live in it and rent it out. So, for example, we had a property that we just missed out on in a small city in Rhode Island called Woonsocket, and Woonsocket is considered a very C minus area in general, and it sold for over $107,000 per door, which I find ridiculous because 5 years ago they would have sold for less than 50 a door. But
wow.
because the market's hot, because it's an hour and 20 minutes from Boston, because people are looking for a place to live, and because there's no inventory, these things are selling out of this world. By the way, my offer was 107 a door. We actually got outbid by two other people.
Wow. Wow. That's
Well,
crazy.
it was an on-market deal. It was, I
Hmm.
mean, we like to focus on off-market deals, but if you have people that are ready to rent, sometimes if you already have people all ready to go, you look for anything to fill the spots, so you can keep the income.
Yeah. So you mentioned that when we're going up to kind of more so like the middle like size, mid-size type deals, that typically a big challenge is on like the raising the money, aspect, raising the capital and everything. And you said a lot of people in your experience, they're not necessarily interested in the syndication type model for that, but the JV model, right? So can you tell us a little bit about like what exactly are they looking for in this JV model? What are your expectations for the JV partners? What are their expectations for you? How do you guys put something like that together?
So yeah, so the JV model, you got to be very careful because you can only have so many people involved in a deal in which they're actively involved in the deal. Okay, you got some people that say they want a JV model, but really they just want to dump money in and they don't want to touch it. That's not a JV model. All the attorneys, especially the syndication attorneys, have been talking about this a lot lately. We're worried as the market's going up how much the SEC is going to come after people for that kind of stuff. So you got to be very careful. But yeah, some people just want to have a lot more control. And if you're doing a JV, you have more of a voting right, et cetera, than if you do a syndication. You're very much more passive. It's more control than buying a stock, but it's still, you basically are giving your money to general partners who you trust that can make you a better profit than you can make yourself without doing any work yourself, which is pretty cool.
Hmm.
I've invested in 6 deals as a passive investor in the last year myself. They're big names. You might have interviewed a few of them, stuff like that. But I do it not just because I trust the people, which I do. I also do it to build my own network. It's like, hey, listen, I'm doing a deal with this guy. They're like, oh, stuff like that.
So just as a follow-up with the with regards to the JV model, because this deal that you bought recently, it's pretty far, it's quite far away from you, right? It's in another state. So if you can, how would this work out? Because like you said, with a JV, you're in an active role, right? So how would someone go about structuring it in this way? Like, you're out of state, so what would be your role in all of this as an out of state
So,
investor?
yep. So my role on this deal, to be active, the first thing I did is I was the main one that signed the note. They needed someone that could sign on a $2 million mortgage, basically. The second thing is I can do is I'm kind of backup on investor relations. One of the other general partners is the main investor relations person. And the other general partner is the main asset manager. And I can be backup on asset management as well. So I have enough stuff going on. Technically, just being able to sign on the mortgage is enough to give me an active role in it. But it helps that I can do other things as well. I mean, I have a good amount of experience. I have 10 years experience in multifamily real estate. So that actually was on site about 9 days ago. We actually found a new property manager. We interviewed 4 different property managers, and I got to walk. I didn't walk every unit, but I got to see the whole layout of the land and stuff like that, which was really cool. See what
So
we're up against.
so on these deals, you just mentioned property excuse me, property management. So I take it that this is an off-site property manager, or how do you work out the property management deal with this?
Sure. So because it's a 50 unit, you really can't afford to have a full-time property manager of your own on staff. So you're going to have to take, one of the regular but mid-sized property managers in the local area, and they're going to basically take over your building and get paid for it without having to actually be full-time sitting there managing it. So my own partner on the Cash Flow Kings, he has a property management company. He manages about 700 doors for other people in the Rhode Island and Massachusetts markets. So if we had bought that 50 unit here, I would basically, I'm not saying definitely him, because I actually work with 4 different property managers, but I would probably use someone like that to be able to do this. What's really cool about the deal in Idaho is we found someone that wasn't too small and wasn't too big, and he's able to actually use our office space there on site. So he's actually going to have people on site at least 2 days a week, which is really awesome.
So for a deal of this size at a distance, from your perspective, what do you think is, now that after you've already acquired it, right? Now you guys are going to implement the business plan. So what do you think is like the biggest challenge, or potentially some challenges you might be faced because you're not in that market to see it, and touch the building, if you will, every day?
So the biggest challenge so far that I had no idea about, especially since I'm not there, is the overall feeling about the property in the neighborhood. So, it's hard to tell how bad the neighbors think about your property until you're actually there on site. And we were talking so when we interviewed the 4 property managers, 2 of them are from that city, and they said, "Oh, that property? Oh yeah." Well, what happened is that, there's been 3 owners in the last 20 years. And basically one owner was there for like 17 years or so. Then the next owner was only there for like 2 years, kind of bled it dry. Then the latest owner, they were fighting, and they took anybody that they could get to rent some of the units. So the overall feeling about the complex has gone downhill in the past couple of years. So when I talked to the police department, they're like, "Oh yeah," but they're very excited. They actually were happy that we're trying to improve the property, because it makes it a lot easier for them too.
So how has that impacted the vacancy at the property, if I may ask?
So the vacancy, I'm not sure what the vacancy was a while ago. I will say that the vacancy is higher now because we're starting to get rid of the bad seeds, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So we are taking a hit on vacancy, but I've seen that because I have a little bit of experience on the passive income side. I've seen that Rod Cleef is doing a 400 unit in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I swear the vacancy got down into the 40% range. Which,
Wow.
wow, I know, wow to me as well. I was shocked. So I mean, we're just under 80%, and we might go down to the high 60s or something, but it's going to be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Because once people understand that, hey, listen, number one, you got to pay rent, but number two, we're going to take care of the place, they'll start to be proud of it themselves too.
So aside from the renovations and things that I'm sure that you guys are doing, what are some other things that you have in mind, or you think that will need to be done to completely just kind of repackage and and completely change this property in the minds of those in the community?
So number one, obviously, take care of the riffraff. Number two, make improvements to the property. Number three, add new amenities. So we're talking about like a dog park or a dog run on the property. We're putting in a whole new laundry facility in one of the basements of one of the buildings. And the old laundry site did not look nice. So we're going to do that. We might put in a pet wash. We're going to add storage. Just make it a lot nicer, the upkeep. We're going to change the name of the property, which will help, especially with reviews, etc. And so, for example, in the last few years, they didn't even have a full-time property manager, or they didn't have any type of professional property management. So that's a big change in itself.
Got it. All right. So, I mean, you guys really definitely seem as though you have a pretty thorough plan. I'm a little bit surprised though. You mentioned a dog park, right? So how would that work with some of these amenities for like deals of this size? I mean, how do you get the numbers to work out?
So, I mean, when we say a dog park, I mean, we're not talking
Hmm.
about a massive place. We're talking about, putting up some fencing and having it with, security cameras, everything else, where people still clean up for themselves. But just the whole concept of a place where they can go with their pet versus just being all over the property. So
Hmm.
sometimes, I mean, some people are scared of animals and stuff like that. So if you can put them all in one part of the property, it makes it nicer for the overall.
All right. So, with new people that are, or a few people that have already done some deals, what would be a key piece of advice you'd have for them?
So if you've already done a few deals, I would say you got to be out there looking and networking every day, and be a little cautious right now. As you were saying before, there's not a lot of deals out there. Inventory is low. If you can find a true off-market deal, then you have a lot of opportunities.
All right. And if you were to go back in time and you were getting started again, what would be a book that you would recommend to yourself?
Ooh, now that's a good one. Um, let's see. Books I would recommend. Maybe I'll do two. The first one is Atomic Habits. I don't know if you ever read that book. I'm not sure who the actual author is off the top of my head, but Atomic
Uh,
Habits was
James Clear.
James Clear. Yeah,
Hmm.
I said at the same time you did. I wasn't 100%. Yeah, that was a great book, and something like Dave Lindahl, Multifamily Millions, or something like that. One of the things that I wish I had done, but who knew where we were in the market, was go bigger. And I spent a lot of time, like I spent a while playing with like single families and stuff like that. I still have a few single families. We're probably going to sell almost every single family this year, only because where we are in the market now. Now, I'm not saying I won't buy single families again, but once they break out and they don't make that 1% rule anymore in my eyes, it's like the time to go. So for example, I have a nice 4-bedroom colonial in a B area, maybe a B plus area. And basically I bought it for like 150, and the rents at the time were $1,500 a month. So there's a 1% rule. I ended up doing some work to it, put a new roof on and everything else. Right now it's worth around 325, and we're only renting it for 2,000 a month.
Hmm.
So, it doesn't make that 1% rule anymore. So in my opinion, it's time to move on from that. Try to buy something else. And it's probably going to be multi. I mean, could it be other things? Yes, but obviously real estate is my favorite thing to do, the cash flow and everything else, plus the tax benefits, the leverage.
All right. So, how could our listeners get in touch with you if they wanted to reach out?
Sure. So, Frank Patalano, I am almost everywhere on social media. My partner Jimmy and I have a podcast called The Cash Flow Kings. We're pretty big on Instagram, especially. We just passed 10,000 followers. And you could also send an email, Frank at ribuy.com, because I buy in Rhode Island, ribuy.com.